Hello all, my name is Janessa Fowler and I will be discussing the genetic disorder congenital adrenal hyperplasia with you. And I will be addressing it as CAH many times throughout this presentation just to keep it a little bit shorter. Let's get started. A little background and history on CAH. CAH affects the adrenal glands, which are meant to produce corticosteroids, mineralocorticoids, and androgens. So ultimately, CAH abrupts the production of enzymes that are needed to make specific hormones. There are two forms of CAH. There is the classic and the non-classic form. The classic CAH can be further subcategorized into the salt-wasting and viralizing forms. The salt-wasting form is the most common and the most severe, while non-classic is the least severe. It is recommended in the US that all newborns undergo genetic testing to screen for classic CAH, and unfortunately, the non-classic form cannot be identified during this screening, so it often isn't diagnosed until later in life. And if CAH is suspected in older children and young adults, a doctor can order a number of different tests to determine if it really is CAH. And regarding the inheritance and prevalence of CAH, CAH is inherited in an autosomal recessive pattern, meaning an individual with CAH would have to inherit an abnormal gene from each parent. And I'll go over a few Punnett squares and example pedigrees in the upcoming slides. In terms of the prevalence of CAH, approximately 1 in 15,000 newborns in the United States and Europe have the most common form of CAH, which is the 21-hydroxylase deficiency. The salt-wasting form of CAH is much more common among Yupik Eskimos, affecting about 1 in 282 individuals. And just to refresh your mind, the salt-wasting form is the most severe form of CAH, so this is a high prevalence in one population. Moving on here. So here we can examine a pedigree illustrating an example of the autosomal recessive inheritance of CAH. If we look at Joyce and Ron here on the left-hand side, Ron is afflicted with CAH while Joyce is not. And as a result, all of their children will become carriers for CAH. So if one of their children produces offspring with another individual who is affected with CAH, then their offspring have a 25% chance of being afflicted with CAH. And this can be seen here, again on the left-hand side, with the offspring produced by Sharon and Guy in this example. And if you would like to learn more about how the gene will appear in offspring depending on whether or not the parents are affected with a gene disorder, are carriers for a gene disorder, or are none of the aforementioned, you can look through the following slides, and I have a few different examples of Punnett squares that discuss the genotype, the phenotype, and the possible offsprings and explanations of such. So just to kind of review here, so here we have a Punnett square of both parents that are afflicted with CAH. So we've got the parent genotypes, the parent phenotypes right here. We've got a Punnett square, possible offspring genotypes, possible offspring phenotypes, and just a little explanation of why it is that way. Here for one parent being afflicted with CAH, and this slide here with one parent afflicted with CAH and one parent as a carrier for CAH. And lastly here, this is if neither parent is afflicted or a carrier for CAH. So now I will discuss the physical effects of CAH. The characteristics of CAH are usually abnormally enlarged adrenal glands. Females with severe CAH can appear with atypical external genitalia, and both genders can experience early onset of puberty, enhanced body growth, and premature completion of growth. Also, classic CAH causes an insufficient production of cortisol, which can influence the blood pressure, blood sugar, and stress levels in an individual. The actual gene that causes CAH is the CYP21A2 gene, and its official name is the cytochrome P450 family 21 subfamily A member 2 gene. And the mutations that occur in this gene are responsible for all cases of the 21 hydroxylase form of CAH. And there are a few other mutations that can occur that are responsible for the more rare forms of CAH. So the function of the non-mutated gene is to create proteins that catalyze reactions, such as those involved with drug metabolism and the synthesis of cholesterol, steroids, and other lipids. And that protein localizes to the endoplasmic reticulum where it will hydroxylate steroids at the 21 position. And just a little side on, so that's where the name 21 hydroxylase deficiency comes from. And anyways, the steroid hormones, cortisol and aldosterone cannot be synthesized without that aforementioned hydroxylation. And there are two transcript variants encoding different isoforms for that gene. And interestingly, there's a pseudogene located near that specific gene on the DNA sequence. And so it's thought that gene recombination events lead to the transcription of a mutant form of CYP21A2. And just so you know, a pseudogene is a non-functional segment of DNA that resembles functional DNA. So that's ultimately where this mutation comes from and how it presents in individuals. So there are 79 available tests in the genetic testing registry to screen for a 21 hydroxylase deficiency. The different tests are subcategorized into biochemical genetic tests and molecular genetic tests. And there are many more molecular genetic tests available than there are biochemical genetic tests. So the most common molecular genetic test is via the sequence analysis of the entire coding region. And so the diagnostic testing for a 21 hydroxylase deficiency is brought out when a newborn presents with characteristic clinical features. And this usually prompts clinicians to test the newborn serum levels and adrenal androgens. So the genetic testing for this disorder is actually optional because an individual can be diagnosed through methods other than genetic testing. However, newborn genetic screening is pretty common and it has to be done via early detection so that a life-threatening salt wasting crisis doesn't occur. So the goal of this screening is to start newborns on a glucocorticoid and mineralocorticoid treatment as soon as possible. And so as I have mentioned here, LabCorp and Prevention Genetics both offer genetic testing for different turnaround times. And so you can look at that a little bit just to know what those are and what specific specimens they're looking for with those labs. And thankfully, the genetic testing for this disorder isn't associated with any specific controversy. And this is because this genetic disorder is life-threatening if treatment isn't administered as soon as possible. In the next few slides here, we just have a whole bunch of references that I compiled for this presentation. And I really appreciate you taking the time to listen to my presentation and hope you feel more informed about the genetic disorder congenital adrenal hyperplasia. Thank you so much.